Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The shimmering lights of New York City cascaded through the enormous glass windows of the Aurora Hotel's grand ballroom. The room pulsed with energy, a blend of wealth, power, and whispered secrets. Billionaires, politicians, and celebrities mingled, their laughter a symphony of privilege and pretense. Among them stood Alexander Kane, a man whose name alone commanded respect. Tall, with sharp features and an aura of effortless dominance, Alexander was the epitome of success. At only 32, he had conquered the tech industry, building Kane Enterprises into a global juggernaut. Yet tonight, amid the clinking glasses and sparkling chandeliers, Alexander felt an unusual sense of detachment. He scanned the room, his dark eyes searching for something, anything, that might break the monotony of another charity gala filled with superficial conversations and shallow smiles. On the far end of the room, Clara Mitchell adjusted her simple yet elegant black dress. Unlike the other women in the room draped in diamonds and designer gowns, Clara's understated elegance made her stand out. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and her emerald green eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and determination. She wasn't here to mingle or bask in luxury, she had a mission. As a budding journalist trying to make a name for herself, Clara had been sent to the gala undercover. Her editor had tasked her with uncovering the truth behind whispers of corruption tied to one of the evening's attendees. But Clara's focus wavered when her eyes landed on Alexander Kane. He was magnetic. The way he carried himself, the way people gravitated toward him, it was impossible to ignore. Clara wasn't one to be easily impressed, but Alexander exuded a charisma that left her momentarily breathless. Their eyes met. Across the crowded room, time seemed to slow. Clara felt a jolt of electricity, her journalistic instincts clashing with an inexplicable attraction. Alexander, intrigued by the woman who looked both out of place and utterly captivating, excused himself from a tedious conversation and approached her. Enjoying the evening? His voice was smooth, deep, and tinged with curiosity. Clara forced herself to maintain composure. "It's overwhelming but interesting," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Alexander Kane, he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Clara Mitchell," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Alexander was intrigued by Clara's intelligence and quick wit. Unlike the sycophants he usually encountered, she challenged him, meeting his sharp remarks with equally sharp retorts. Clara, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the man behind the billionaire facade. A man who, beneath the surface, seemed to crave something deeper. Hours passed like minutes. They moved from the crowded ballroom to the quieter terrace, the city lights serving as their backdrop. Clara's initial intentions, her undercover mission, faded into the background as she got lost in Alexander's world. "You're not like anyone I've met before," Alexander admitted, his gaze intense. Clara laughed softly. "Is that a line you use often?" "No," he said, his tone serious. "And I'm not used to hearing no." Clara smirked. "Then it's good you're meeting me." The chemistry between them was undeniable. As the night deepened, the air between them grew charged. When Alexander leaned in, Clara didn't pull away. Their kiss was electric, a collision of two worlds that should have never intersected. The night unfolded in a haze of passion and spontaneity. Neither thought about tomorrow or the consequences. It was a moment suspended in time, free of responsibilities and the weight of their realities. But the morning brought clarity. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the windows of Alexander's penthouse, Clara woke with a mix of exhilaration and dread. Alexander, still asleep, looked peaceful, a stark contrast to the commanding presence he had displayed the night before. Clara knew she couldn't stay. This wasn't her world, and she had no illusions about where a connection with a man like Alexander Kane would lead. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, leaving behind only a note. "Thank you for a night I'll never forget. Clara." Weeks later, Clara sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, staring at the 2 blue lines on the pregnancy test. Her heart pounded as reality sank in. She was pregnant, with twins. Alexander Kane's twins. The thought of telling him crossed her mind, but Clara quickly dismissed it. He was a billionaire, living a life of luxury and influence. She was a journalist struggling to build her career. Their worlds didn't overlap. Besides, she didn't want to be seen as someone chasing his wealth or complicating his life. Clara made a choice. She would raise the twins on her own. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. The memory of that night would remain her secret, a fragment of a life she had only glimpsed. As the years passed, Clara poured herself into motherhood and her career, keeping Alexander and their brief connection buried in the past. But little did she know, fate had other plans. 7 years later, that past was about to come crashing back in a way she could never have anticipated. The buzzing energy of the Texpo conference filled the cavernous halls of the Javits Center in New York City. Entrepreneurs, developers, and industry leaders mingled amidst futuristic displays of AI prototypes, robotic innovations, and cutting-edge gadgets. Clara Mitchell, now a successful freelance journalist, held the hands of her twin boys, Max and Theo, as they navigated the bustling crowd. "Mom, can we check out the robot dog booth?" Max asked, his brown eyes wide with excitement. Theo chimed in, tugging at her other hand. "No, I want to see the flying drones." Clara laughed, her auburn hair pulled into a casual ponytail. Her boys, nearly 7 years old, were a bundle of energy and curiosity. They were her world, and every decision she made revolved around giving them the best life she could. "Okay, one at a time," she said, smiling. "First the robots, then the drones." As they moved toward the robotics exhibit, Clara felt a familiar sense of pride watching her sons. Max, the older twin by 3 minutes, was outgoing and adventurous, always the first to ask questions. Theo, quieter and more observant, preferred to watch and analyze before diving in. Their contrasting personalities complemented each other perfectly. Meanwhile, across the expo floor, Alexander Kane arrived with his usual entourage. His presence was impossible to ignore. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, his every step exuded authority. He was here to unveil Kane Enterprises' latest innovation, a state-of-the-art AI interface that promised to revolutionize healthcare diagnostics. But even as he engaged with investors and tech enthusiasts, Alexander couldn't shake a nagging emptiness. Over the years, his professional achievements had soared, yet his personal life felt stagnant. Relationships were fleeting, often driven by ulterior motives, and he had grown weary of the constant pretense. As he walked toward the robotics section, something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. A woman stood a few feet away, her back turned to him. There was something strikingly familiar about her auburn hair and graceful stance. She leaned down to speak to 2 young boys, their excited chatter carrying over the noise of the crowd. Alexander froze. His heart skipped a beat as the woman turned, revealing a face he hadn't seen in nearly 7 years. It was Clara Mitchell. Clara didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in wrangling her boys. Max had already darted ahead to the robot dog display, while Theo tugged on her hand to point out a VR booth nearby. She smiled indulgently, her love for them radiating in every gesture. Then she felt it, a tingling sensation as if someone was watching her. Turning, her eyes locked onto a pair of dark, piercing ones. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Her breath hitched as she registered the man standing a few feet away. Alexander Kane. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a mixture of shock and recognition. Clara's heart pounded as memories of their one unforgettable night came rushing back. She instinctively tightened her grip on Theo's hand, her mind racing with panic and questions. "Clara," Alexander said, his deep voice cutting through the noise around them. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. How could she explain this? How could she prepare herself for the inevitable storm that was about to unfold? Before she could speak, Max ran up to her, holding a small robotic dog in his hands. Mom, look. It's so cool. Alexander's gaze shifted to the boy, and the air between them grew heavier. Max's features were a mirror image of his own. The same dark eyes, the same sharp jawline. And then Alexander looked at Theo, who was shyly peering up at him from behind Clara's leg. The realization hit him like a freight train. Clara could see the wheels turning in Alexander's mind. She could see the questions forming, the emotions flickering across his face: confusion, anger, disbelief. Are they? He trailed off, his voice strained. Alexander, please, Clara whispered, her tone pleading. She glanced around, aware of the public setting. Not here. But Alexander wasn't about to let this moment pass. Clara, we need to talk. No. Her heart sank. There was no escaping this. She nodded reluctantly, leading the boys to a quieter corner of the expo. She handed them a tablet loaded with educational games and told them to stay seated at a nearby bench. Max and Theo, oblivious to the tension, happily complied. Once they were out of earshot, Alexander turned to Clara, his voice low but firm. Are they mine? Clara's lips trembled. She had spent years dreading this moment, rehearsing what she would say if it ever came to this. But now, face to face with the father of her children, words failed her. Yes, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They're yours. The weight of her confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Alexander took a step back, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process the revelation. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his tone sharp with hurt and anger. You kept this from me for 7 years, Clara. 7 years. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. It wasn't an easy decision, she said, her voice trembling. I thought it was best for everyone. You had your life, Alexander. Your empire. I didn't want to complicate things. Complicate things? He repeated, his voice rising slightly. Clara, those are my children. My sons. Don't you think I had a right to know? She flinched at his words but held her ground. And what would you have done, Alexander? Married me out of obligation? Tried to fit us into your world when we didn't belong? I didn't want that for them. I didn't want that for me. Her words hit him hard. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to calm down. I understand why you might have thought that, but you underestimated me, Clara. You took that choice away from me. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Clara wiped away a stray tear, her heart aching with guilt and regret. I'm sorry, she whispered. I did what I thought was right. Alexander's gaze softened, but his resolve remained firm. I need to be a part of their lives. I missed 7 years, Clara. I won't miss another day. Clara nodded, knowing there was no point in resisting. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one she hadn't prepared for but would face head-on. As they rejoined the boys, Alexander crouched down to their level. Hi, he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. I'm Alexander. Max tilted his head, studying him curiously. Are you a friend of Mom's? Alexander smiled faintly, his eyes misty. Something like that? Theo, ever observant, glanced between his mother and Alexander before asking, Why do you look like us? Clara's heart clenched, but before she could respond, Alexander said, Because we're family. The ride to Alexander's penthouse was silent, tense with unspoken emotions. Clara sat in the plush leather seat of his town car, glancing out the window as the towering New York City skyline zipped by. Max and Theo, nestled beside her, were chattering excitedly about the expo, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. Alexander sat across from them, his dark eyes flickering between the boys and Clara. The resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't just their features, it was the way Max carried himself with the same confident energy Alexander had as a child, the quiet curiosity in Theo's gaze that mirrored his own introspection. His sons. The word echoed in his mind, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotions: joy, anger, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the years he had missed. The elevator ride to the penthouse was excruciating. Alexander's penthouse was breathtaking, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering an uninterrupted view of the city, modern minimalist decor, and an undeniable air of luxury. It was a world far removed from Clara's cozy, lived in apartment in Brooklyn. Whoa, Mom, look at this place, Max exclaimed, running to the glass windows. Is this where you live? Theo asked softly, his wide eyes taking in the grandeur. Alexander crouched down to meet Theo's gaze. Yes, it is. And you're welcome here any time. Clara stood frozen near the door, unsure of how to navigate this uncharted territory. Alexander straightened, his gaze locking on her. Can we talk in private? She nodded hesitantly. Boys, stay here. Don't touch anything, okay? Max gave her a thumbs up, already engrossed in the view, while Theo nodded solemnly. Alexander gestured toward his study, a sleek room with a large oak desk and walls lined with books. The moment the door closed behind them, Alexander's calm facade cracked. Why, Clara? He demanded, his voice low but heavy with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? You robbed me of 7 years with my sons. Clara clenched her hands, feeling the weight of his words. I didn't do it to hurt you, Alexander. I thought I was protecting them. Protecting myself? Protecting them from what? From me. His voice rose, and he immediately checked himself, running a hand through his hair. You had no right to make that decision alone. I know it wasn't fair, Clara admitted, her voice trembling. But think about it from my perspective. You were a billionaire, Alexander. You had the world at your feet. What would you have done if I'd told you I was pregnant? He hesitated, his mind flashing back to the man he had been 7 years ago, driven, single-minded, and consumed by his company. I don't know, he said honestly. But I deserved the chance to decide. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I was scared, okay? I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want them to grow up feeling like an afterthought in your life. Is that what you think of me? He asked, his voice softening. That I'd treat them as an obligation? No, Clara whispered. Not now. But back then, I didn't know you like I do now. Alexander sighed, leaning against the desk. I'm not the man I was 7 years ago. I would have stepped up, Clara. I would have been there for them. I believe you, she said, her voice barely audible. And I'm sorry. The tension eased slightly, but the air between them remained heavy with unresolved feelings. Alexander straightened, his resolve clear. What's done is done. But from this moment forward, I'm going to be in their lives. They deserve to know their father. Clara nodded, her heart aching with a mixture of relief and fear. They've only known me. This is going to be a huge adjustment for them. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it work, Alexander said firmly. But there's one thing I need to know. Did you ever plan to tell me? Clara hesitated, guilt flashing across her face. I thought about it. So many times. But I always convinced myself it was better this way. I see now that I was wrong. Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. We'll figure this out. Together. Back in the living room, Max and Theo were inspecting a model of a Kane Enterprises rocket on the coffee table. Boys, Alexander said, drawing their attention. Can we sit down for a minute? I need to tell you something important. Clara's heart raced as she joined them on the couch, sitting between her sons. Alexander sat across from them, his usual commanding presence tempered with vulnerability. Max, Theo, he began, his voice gentle. You've probably noticed that we look a lot alike. That's because I'm your dad. The twins exchanged wide-eyed glances before looking back at him. Our dad? Max asked, his voice filled with wonder. Yes, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know about you before today, but now that I do, I want to be part of your lives. If that's okay with you. Theo leaned against Clara, his small hands clutching her arm. Why didn't we know before? He asked softly. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It's a long story, sweetheart. But the important thing is, your dad is here now, and he wants to get to know you. Max studied Alexander intently, then grinned. Does that mean we get to come here and see all this cool stuff? Alexander chuckled, the sound tinged with relief. Absolutely. And there's more where that came from. Theo looked up at Clara, his eyes filled with questions. Is it okay, Mom? Clara smiled, her heart swelling with love for her boys. Yes, baby. It's okay. That night, after Alexander drove them home, Clara tucked Max and Theo into bed. She kissed their foreheads, lingering a moment to watch their peaceful faces. When she stepped into the living room, Alexander was waiting by the door. "Thank you," he said softly, "for letting me be part of their lives." Clara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "They deserve to know you. And maybe I do too." The weeks that followed Alexander's revelation were a whirlwind of emotions, adjustments, and uncharted territory. Max and Theo quickly warmed to the idea of having a father. Their innate curiosity and enthusiasm for new experiences made them eager to bond with Alexander, who was equally determined to make up for lost time. For Clara, however, the transition was far more complicated. Her carefully constructed life, built on independence and self-reliance, was now intertwined with the billionaire she had tried so hard to forget. Building connections. Alexander's efforts to connect with the twins were nothing short of extraordinary. He cleared his schedule to spend time with them, planning outings that left them wide-eyed with excitement. From private tours of Kane Enterprises tech labs to courtside seats at Knicks games, Alexander spared no expense. But it wasn't the lavish gestures that won them over, it was the little things. Like how he patiently taught Theo how to build a model rocket or cheered the loudest at Max's weekend soccer game. Alexander's genuine love for the boys became evident in every interaction, and Clara couldn't help but admire his determination. One Saturday afternoon, Alexander invited Clara and the boys to his estate in the Hamptons. The sprawling property, complete with a private beach and a state-of-the-art game room, was a playground for Max and Theo. While the boys explored, Clara and Alexander sat on the deck overlooking the ocean. "You're really good with them," Clara admitted, sipping her iced tea. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a rare softness in his expression. "They're amazing kids, Clara. You did an incredible job raising them." Her cheeks flushed at the compliment. "Thank you. But they're just as much you as they are me." Alexander hesitated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've missed so much. I can't stop thinking about all the milestones I wasn't there for, the first steps, the first words." Clara reached out, her hand brushing his. "You're here now. That's what matters." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the barriers between them seemed to crumble. But just as quickly, Clara pulled her hand away, the weight of their history crashing down on her. Challenges arise. Despite the progress they were making, their newfound dynamic wasn't without challenges. The media caught wind of Alexander's connection to Clara and the twins, and the story quickly became tabloid fodder. Headlines like "Billionaire Alexander Kane's Secret Family Revealed" and "Tech Tycoon's Twins, Scandal or Fairy Tale?" plastered newsstands and social media feeds. Clara's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, friends, and even strangers. The sudden attention was overwhelming, and she worried about its impact on Max and Theo. "Mom, why are people taking pictures of us?" Max asked one afternoon after school, his brow furrowed in confusion. Clara crouched down to his level, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes, people are curious about things they don't understand. But you don't need to worry about that, okay? Dad and I will handle it." Alexander was furious. He hired a team of PR specialists and security personnel to protect Clara and the boys from the paparazzi. He also issued a rare public statement, asking for privacy and condemning the invasive tactics of the press. "You shouldn't have to deal with this," he told Clara one evening. "This is my fault." Clara shook her head. "It's not your fault. It's just our reality now. But thank you for handling it." Their shared crisis brought them closer, forcing them to work as a team to shield their children from the chaos. Complicated feelings. As the weeks turned into months, Clara found herself grappling with feelings she thought she had buried. Watching Alexander interact with the boys, seeing his dedication and vulnerability, stirred something deep within her. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Alexander stayed behind to discuss their upcoming co-parenting schedule. Clara brewed a pot of tea, and they sat in her modest living room, the atmosphere unusually intimate. "You've changed," Clara said suddenly, her voice soft. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "Different from the man I met 7 years ago. More grounded." He chuckled, a self-deprecating smile tugging at his lips. "Life has a way of humbling you, doesn't it? Clara nodded, her eyes lingering on him. It suits you? The air between them grew charged, the unspoken tension thickening. Alexander leaned forward, his gaze searching hers. Clara, do you ever think about that night? Her breath hitched. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Do you regret it? He asked, his tone earnest. She shook her head, tears welling up. How could I? It gave me Max and Theo. And it gave me a glimpse of something I never thought I'd have. Alexander reached out, his hand brushing hers. Maybe we could have it again. For real this time. Clara pulled back, her walls rising. This isn't just about us anymore, Alexander. It's about them. I can't risk complicating their lives. Alexander sighed, nodding reluctantly. I understand. But I'm not giving up on us, Clara. Not yet. The media storm escalates. Their fragile peace was shattered when a rival billionaire, Victor Langston, sought to exploit the situation. Langston, an old adversary of Alexander's, leaked confidential documents suggesting Kane Enterprises had engaged in unethical practices. While the claims were unfounded, the timing was disastrous, as it fueled speculation about Alexander's personal life. The stress began to take its toll on Clara. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, and reporters bombarded her with questions about her relationship with Alexander. The boys, though shielded as much as possible, sensed the tension and grew quieter. One evening, as Clara sat in her living room scrolling through endless articles, Alexander arrived unannounced. His face was grim, his usually composed demeanor strained. We need to talk, he said, his voice low. Clara gestured for him to sit, her heart sinking. What's going on? Langston's attacks are escalating. He's not just coming for me, he's coming for you and the boys. I'm putting additional security in place, but I need you to trust me. Clara's fists clenched. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Alexander. This life, it's not normal. It's not safe. I know, he said, his voice breaking. But I'll fix this. I'll protect you. All of you. Despite her fear and frustration, Clara saw the sincerity in his eyes. She nodded, silently praying that they could weather the storm together. As Alexander left that night, Clara sat alone in the quiet of her apartment, her mind racing. For the first time in years, she realized how deeply intertwined their lives had become. She wasn't just protecting her boys anymore, she was protecting her heart. The relentless media frenzy showed no signs of slowing down. Clara, Max, and Theo were prisoners in their own home, their lives disrupted by the chaos surrounding Alexander's public and private life. Alexander had doubled the security around Clara's apartment, but the constant intrusion was wearing on her. She couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake letting him into their lives. But Alexander wasn't the type of man to back down from a challenge. Determined to protect his family, he launched an investigation into Victor Langston's attacks while continuing to spend as much time as possible with Clara and the boys. A sudden threat. The breaking point came one afternoon when Clara and the boys were walking to their favorite park. Despite the security team trailing them, Clara felt uneasy. Her instincts proved correct when a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. Two masked men jumped out, grabbing Clara and Theo while Max screamed in terror. "Mom!" Max shouted, trying to run after them, but one of the guards scooped him up and shielded him. Chaos erupted as the security team intercepted the kidnappers, but not before they managed to shove Clara and Theo into the SUV. The vehicle sped off, leaving Max and the rest of the team behind. Alexander's desperation. When Alexander received the call, he was in the middle of a board meeting. The moment he heard the words Clara and Theo have been taken, he bolted from the room, his face a mask of fury and fear. "Find them," he barked at his head of security as he raced to his car. "I don't care what it costs, bring them back." Within minutes, Alexander was at Clara's apartment, where Max sat clutching one of his toys, tears streaming down his face. Seeing his son so vulnerable broke something in Alexander. He knelt down, pulling Max into a tight embrace. "I'll bring them home," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I swear to you I'll bring them home." The rescue. Alexander's team worked tirelessly, using every resource at their disposal. It didn't take long to trace the kidnappers to an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Alexander insisted on going himself, despite the protests of his security detail. Inside the warehouse, Clara and Theo were tied to chairs, their captors pacing nervously. Clara's heart pounded as she whispered reassurances to Theo, who clung to her hand. "It's going to be okay, baby. Just stay strong." The sound of tires screeching outside made the kidnappers freeze. Moments later, Alexander and his team stormed in, guns drawn. A brief but intense standoff ensued, ending with the kidnappers subdued and Clara and Theo freed. The moment Clara saw Alexander, she ran into his arms, sobbing with relief. Theo clung to Alexander, his small frame trembling. "You're safe now," Alexander whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I've got you." The aftermath. Back at Alexander's penthouse, the family reunited. Max threw himself into Clara's arms, crying tears of relief. Alexander watched the scene, his chest tightening with a mix of anger, guilt, and love. He had come too close to losing them. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Clara and Alexander sat in the living room. She was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she sipped a glass of water. "Why is this happening?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why can't we just live a normal life?" Alexander reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "This is my fault," he admitted. "My world isn't safe, Clara. But I swear to you, I'll do everything in my power to make it right." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. "I don't know if I can do this, Alexander. The boys, they deserve stability. And they'll have it," he promised. "Langston is done. I've already set things in motion to dismantle his empire. He'll never come near you or the boys again." Clara nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "We've been through so much, Alexander. If we're going to do this, if we're going to be a family, you have to prove to me that we're safe. That this can work." Rebuilding as a family. True to his word, Alexander took drastic measures to ensure Clara and the boys' safety. He expanded his security team, moved Clara and the twins into a secured estate just outside the city, and finalized the legal proceedings against Victor Langston. Within weeks, Langston's influence crumbled, and the media frenzy subsided. With the immediate danger behind them, Clara began to see Alexander in a new light. He wasn't just a powerful billionaire, he was a man who had risked everything to protect her and their sons. Slowly but surely, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. A new beginning. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the estate's sprawling terrace, Alexander turned to Clara. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About proving that this can work." Clara raised an eyebrow. And I want you to know that I'm not just doing this for the boys," he said earnestly. "I'm doing it for us. Because I love you, Clara." Her breath caught. She had always known Alexander cared, but hearing him say the words left her speechless. "Alexander, you don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, I'll be here for you. For them, boys." Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've already proven more than I ever thought possible. I love you too." A bright future. The months that followed were filled with joy and healing. Clara and Alexander's relationship blossomed, built on trust and mutual respect. The boys thrived, enjoying a life filled with love, adventure, and the unwavering support of their parents. On a sunny spring afternoon, surrounded by close friends and family, Alexander and Clara exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony in the garden of their estate. As Max and Theo stood beside them, their smiles brighter than the sun, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Their journey had been anything but conventional, but it had brought them to this moment. A moment filled with love, redemption, and the promise of a brighter future as a family. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.